Hey friends, I quickly want to announce a new benefit for all paid subscribers. You now have access to the stand-up marketplace where you can advertise anything you want. A service or product that you offer, a profile of yourself, a singles ad, I don't care. If you're a subscriber and I approve it, you can post it. Information and directions to be a part of the stand-up marketplace will also be included in each day's subscriber email. A new benefit for stand-up subscribers. The Stand Up with Pete Dominick Marketplace. Check it out now. And now, here's today's show. Hello, my friends, my family, my mom, my cousin Darcy, and everybody listening. Thank you very much for pressing play on the Stand Up with Pete Dominick podcast. I'm here every day, and I appreciate any time you check in. You should know that I almost always have a news roundup from Earth One here for you at the beginning of every show. And, of course, I've always got a brilliant guest to join me in conversation, and I get to fire questions at such an honor. And thank you so much for supporting me and allowing me to do this work that gives me so much purpose, and we learn so much along the way. Today, a very special guest, someone who I've been really anticipating talking to since I first talked to him years ago and found out that he has a very important new book out. It is Dr. Jonathan Metzl, the acclaimed physician and sociologist who speaks, teaches, and writes about a wide range of issues, including mental illness, gun violence, race, and whiteness in America. He's the author of Dying of Whiteness, How the Politics of Racial Resentment is Killing America's Heartland, a highly referenced book, a New York Times bestseller, and he has a new book out that is so important, of course, because he's a gun violence expert, professor, and psychiatrist, which is this unique combination that allows Jonathan Metzl to speak and write about gun violence in America in a particular way that addresses stereotypes that link guns with race or mental illness, or that blame mental illness for shootings and other crimes. He corrects so much of that in his new book. The topic is the focus of what we've become, living and dying in a country of arms. It is so important. You must buy this book. Jonathan Metzl and I begin our conversation on today's show at about 26 minutes after a very long wind-up, I'll say. But first, your news from Earth One, where vaccines are a public health miracle, man-made climate change is a real thing, and Joe Biden won the 2020 election. I'm Pete Dominick. I'm your host. Let's get after it. Well, yesterday, of course, was the big eclipse. Did you watch it? What did you do? I mentioned at last week's hangout that I wasn't really planning much for it. I wasn't really even that excited or anticipating it, and I got rightly and resoundingly criticized for that lazy and ignorant opinion. I came around. I got excited. I got the glasses. I was out there watching it with Julia. Indy had her glasses on because Julia actually thought that Indy might look up at the sun, because she treats her like a human infant, but that's neither there, it's neither here. My brother went to my parents' house in Syracuse, which was in the path of totality, as they say, and it was cloudy. So we actually had a great view where I was in the Hudson Valley in New York. I hope you did wherever you were or watched it on some high definition video at some point during your day. But it was nice to take that break and experience that unique experience that I think the nicest part of it was that we were all experiencing something. This awe-inspiring cosmic coincidence, the moon and sun perfectly aligned, that we call a total solar eclipse visible across North America. The moon's shadow plunged daylight into darkness, carving a path from Mexico up to Maine into Canada. And while the event only offered a few minutes of totality in any location, I sat there for over an hour and began watching it just as the moon started cutting into the sun, taking a bite out of it. I, along with millions of onlookers, many of you, join it together in the Discord. Maybe I should have planned some event around it, but it really was this kind of rare moment of mass gathering in a time where our culture, our country, our society is so splintered. And of course, we were still divided about the eclipse to some extent, taking shots at each other. I certainly was making jokes to the expense of ignorant science deniers and coming off as an elitist know-it-all prick, but hey, science did predict this eclipse would happen when it did, to the second, and exactly as it did, and also did a pretty good job at predicting the weather that we experience around it as well. So I hope you enjoyed it and got something out of it. I look forward to talking with you about it at this week's Hangout. Hopefully nobody went blind. I always love to see that picture of Trump looking up at the sun during the 2017 solar eclipse. It's just so declarative of who he is, because it's not only is he stupid in so many ways, but he has this kind of arrogance where he thinks he's a god and somehow his eyeballs are different than the rest of ours. And maybe they are. His skin certainly is, and hair. No, he does that to himself. And speaking of him, the big news yesterday from the disgraced former president, whose handpicked judges overturned women's reproductive rights. He made his big announcement that we were anticipating and said that abortion limits should be decided by states. Big news yesterday, and the reaction to it far and wide. Trump has, of course, offered wavering signals for months about his views on abortion access, and over his history, he's had public declarations of completely different stances wherever the wind was blowing before he became president and wanted to cater to the far right, Christian conservatives, Christian nationalists, the anti-abortion folks. Well, he delivered a statement declaring that abortion rights restrictions ought to be left up to the states. I'll bring you the audio of it in a 4-minute audio tape that he put out. Quick response by President Biden, the Biden campaign, and obviously everybody has something to say about this. But the disgraced former president who overturned reproductive rights said that he was strongly in favor of exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. His comments, of course, are an effort to please the conservative base without also alienating some swing voters. Even he understands that you've got to win the election, though he doesn't care if he wins or loses. He'll still declare that he won. But his stance obviously angered the pro-women, pro-choice side, most of us in America. But people like his former vice president, Mike Pence, called it a, quote, slap in the face to anti-abortion voters, while Democrats said that it was effectively an endorsement of the harshest state restrictions. But, of course, Mike Pence, a Christian nationalist, evangelical Christian, whatever you want to call it, he's embraced abortion restrictions at the federal, the national level, and said that the disgraced former president, his old boss, statement was a retreat on the matter. In a statement on social media, he described Mr. Trump as retreated on the issue, indicated that his discontent was centered on Trump's lack of endorsement or any mention at all of a federal ban. He said, too many Republicans are already too awash on their hands of the battle for life. Ugh, Mike Pence, who, of course, thinks it should be outlawed in every state. And a lot more reaction, and I'll give you some of the audio. But moving on to other headlines as I try to get through as many as I can in about 10 minutes. Before I get to those audio clips, I've got, of course, to tell you that President Biden announced a large-scale effort to help pay off federal student loans after his initial attempt was blocked last year by the Supreme Court. His new plan, he announced in Wisconsin, of course, a swing state, would eliminate debt for more than 4 million Americans and reduce the burden for about 25 million others likely to face legal challenges that could take months to resolve. But he announced the plan in Madison, Wisconsin, the capital of a critical swing state, and college town, where, of course, the Biden campaign desperately needs to get an election year boost and win. All right, moving on. Let's go to the Middle East, where Israel's troop drawdown left Gaza with no active battles, according to the New York Times. The Gaza Strip, for the first time since November, now without a major active battle. Israel's military announced yesterday it had withdrawn from southern Gaza, leaving fewer than 5,000 Israeli troops in all of the territory. The war, according to analysts, appears to be entering a new phase in which Israeli forces will mostly mount brief raids into the enclave before retreating to Israel. But the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also escalated his pledge to invade Rafah, declaring in a video statement yesterday that it will happen. There is a date, without elaborating. And he said this while Israeli negotiators were in Cairo discussing international efforts to broker a ceasefire deal with Hamas. So the headlines say they've pulled out of southern Gaza, but the prime minister is also promising to invade southern Gaza. So it's a bit conflicting. The Biden administration now showing concern that Iran may be planning to hit targets inside Israel in retaliation for the Israeli airstrikes in Syria this week that killed several senior Iranian officials, according to U.S. officials reporting on that. Let's head to Russia, shall we? Kharkiv. 2 Russian strikes on Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, killed 8 civilians, injured at least 10 early on Saturday in the afternoon, according to regional officials. And here at home, violence in Miami and Las Vegas, mass shootings. First in Miami, a shooting at a bar, a popular outdoor Miami suburb, early Saturday that left 2 dead and 7 injured, according to local law enforcement. An altercation at a martini bar at 3:30 in the morning. Just don't be out at 3:30 in the morning, all right? Just nothing really good happens at that time at night night around alcohol. That's my one thing. I'm not going to live in fear of being killed in a mass shooting. I'm not going to. It's far more likely that other things more likely happen, and I'm not going to live in fear too much of those either. But hey, 3:30 in the morning, don't go out. And certainly not blaming those victims, obviously, innocent victims. It's one thing I do tell my girls. Nothing really great happens around alcohol at 3:30 in the morning. And of course, in Las Vegas, 2 people at a Las Vegas law office were killed in a shooting Monday morning. The gunman took his own life. The incident took place at a law firm in Las Vegas. The sheriff said 2 people, a husband and a wife, I think, the lawyers were killed, and then the gunman was believed to have killed himself. Some relationship there. An investigation underway, of course, but those 2 shootings here at home. And let's move to some other depressing news quickly. Get through it. We'll get to some comedy. The levels of crucial heat-trapping gases in the atmosphere reached historic highs last year, growing at near record fast paces, according to the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration reporting yesterday. I think those are the headlines that I gathered for you. Of course, the men's basketball championship still going on. As I'm recording this, I might come back and mention who won. Let me just mark it, and you can take a little peek behind the curtain about how I do things, because then I'll say this. Holy cow, the UConn men absolutely shellacked the men of Purdue 75-60 in the NCAA men's national championship. Congratulations to the Huskies. Those are your headlines. That's what I've got for you from the important, impactful news that affects you, your family, your community, your country, and of course, your planet, especially if the moon gets in between it and the sun, which is what happened yesterday. And so let's get to some of the audio clips that I've got for you. First, here now is the disgraced former president. I obviously am not going to play the whole 4 minutes, but just a quick clip excerpt from his announcement yesterday, where he tries to, I guess, have it both ways, please everybody, but really probably pleased no one when he said he supports states' rights on abortion laws.
I was proudly the person responsible for the ending of something that all legal scholars, both sides, wanted and, in fact, demanded be ended. Roe v. Wade.
All legal scholars. I mean, why? Okay, well, obviously he just says whatever he wants to say, but all legal scholars agree on nothing is the answer. I think we all know that, right? We know enough to know that. And the president knew exactly what to say and jumped right into it with a quick reaction on social media posted everywhere.
Donald Trump just endorsed every single state ban on reproductive care nationwide. If MAGA Republicans put a federal ban on his desk, he'd sign it. Donald Trump is the reason Roe's ended. If you reelect me, I'll be the reason why it's restored.
Yeah, powerful statement from the current president, jumping right on that and taking full advantage of it. I hope people will share that message if you haven't seen it from, well, both of them. All right, what's next? Let's see. How about Matthew Miller? He's the State Department spokesman for the Biden administration for Anthony Blinken, and he reacted to Benjamin Netanyahu's threat to invade Rafah. Here's a little bit of that from yesterday, along with reporting from PBS NewsHour reporters.
We think it would, number one, harm all the more than 1.4 million Palestinians. It would hinder the delivery of humanitarian assistance. So we have made clear that we don't want to see that full-scale invasion in any event.
In the last few days, Israel has opened additional crossings, and today more than 415 trucks entered Gaza, the largest number since the war began. But the UN and U.S. are pushing for the number to increase to pre-war levels above 500.
It is not just important that they take initial steps to facilitate the increase of humanitarian assistance, but that increased flow of humanitarian assistance be sustained over time.
Increased humanitarian assistance is one of Hamas's demands on hostage negotiations. Regional officials tell me that CIA Director Bill Burns, Qatar's prime minister, and Israeli and Egyptian spy chiefs have created a new proposal that's gone to Hamas, in which Israel has softened its resistance to a Hamas request to let Gazans return to northern Gaza, but not by enough to expect an imminent breakthrough. What U.S. officials do fear is imminent, an attack by Iran, in response to an Israeli strike in Damascus that killed senior Iranian commanders.
All right, let's head over to Earth 2. That's Fox News, of course, where they live. And they were desperately trying to shoehorn the Biden's border crisis into their coverage of the eclipse.
Bill, wow. It's so interesting to hear the celebratory atmosphere down there because, you know, typically in your coverage from Eagle Pass over the last 4 years, nobody's been celebrating. So this really is unusual.
It's remarkable. It almost feels like it's like a rave going on out here, John. Across the river from us, we got flashing lights. We got a stage with music going on. Brian, you want to show it real quick, or we can maybe see it on the drone? But we got the drone in the air. But it is like it feels like we're in the middle of the night out here now.
You can see the migrants trying to get across into America for a better life, and then all of them are also going to. I'm sorry, that wouldn't have been Fox News' reporting. He didn't say that anyway, but it was just John Roberts. Just bad. Ugh, hate to hear it. Trump's first spokesman, remember Sean Spicer, that idiot, he tweeted also about it. He said, when the eclipse is done, you could still use your eclipse glasses. They're helpful when trying to look at the Biden record. It's important to never look directly at it because it can hurt your eyes and brain. Yep, you got him. He always wins big, that Sean Spicer. Wow, what an embarrassment. What a self-own. It's so embarrassing, their jokes, that we're all looking at them and wondering who their audience is and what they can possibly think that that's interesting, funny, or original in any way. Anyway, here's a fun clip from Fox News yesterday where Trump's other former spokesman, Kayleigh McEnany, and Harris Faulkner had a weird exchange because Kayleigh McEnany mentions a bunch of rich white guys, and Harris Faulkner then says that they're all black guys, but they're rich white billionaires. Here's the whole full minute.
The talking points were lies. I mean, who was the racist that was there? The people at the fundraiser, Tim Scott was there, Vivek Ramaswamy, the owner of the Jets, Woody Johnson was there, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, Steve Wynn. Like, these are mainstream
You know what he's
folks.
saying, right?
Yeah, it was just a lie. It was a lie that he wanted to go out on MSNBC and there's no accountability there, so he could do it. But to your point, Kennedy, I think it's an important one. I saw a clip of Biden going, I'm the party of grassroots. That picture with 3 presidents, $100,000. The tickets went for upwards of $500,000. I'd love to know how many billionaires were at Radio City, because I've got to guess a lot of people with pocket change, $500,000 to shell out on a ticket to see Obama and Biden. Got to guess you're somewhere close to a billionaire or somewhere hundreds of millions of dollars. And Trump doubled the fundraising record, essentially. Pretty big deal.
There you go. I want to say this. So they bring out the black surrogate to talk about racism, because apparently the people that you just listed on that list, they're all black, but they're not Democrats.
Not Democrats.
There you go. That's what he's saying.
No, the people she listed are mostly white. She listed Tim Scott, Vivek Ramaswamy, Woody Johnson, Wilbur Ross, and Steve Wynn. The only one who's black is Tim Scott. Vivek Ramaswamy doesn't identify as black. And obviously, the other 3 guys are super white, rich billionaires who actually worked in the Trump administration. Anyway, they're real white. Steve Wynn, Wilbur Ross, and Woody Johnson. It's super weird that the black woman on Fox News referred to rich white guys as black guys. So there you go. Thought that was real fun time, real fun ride. That woman really loves her job. She really wants to keep that job. The pretty black lady on Fox News who constantly seemingly is defending Trump and the whites. And I mean the worst whites. You want to know just how bad? Well, one of them is Woody Johnson. And later on last night, he was on Fox News with one of the other worst whites, Jesse Waters. So just by appearing on his show and agreeing with him. But here he is making a great point. Woody Johnson, the owner of the New York Jets, the child of the wealthy Johnson & Johnson family, inherited his money. Here he is.
And I think the world will be a safer and better place. There'll be less crime.
Come on.
He's extremely compassionate. People don't know that. He's extremely funny. I think people are starting to appreciate his sense of humor. Mm-hmm. And he just impressed all of us once again. And I think, the overwhelming thought was, this is just the beginning for us. Everybody in that room was ready to step up hard.
Oh, I mean, I used to be a New York Jets fan. And I stopped watching football for a while. I watch football now, but I root harshly against the New York Jets because because of that guy, because a lot of the fans, of course, that I've met and been around strike me as mostly domestic abusers and racists. But more importantly, that now they also have Aaron Rodgers as their quarterback. So Woody Johnson and Aaron Rodgers deserve each other, and I will be forever rooting against the Jets. Sorry, Dad. He's with me at this point. Come on, Pop. We're Bills fans now. All right. Finally, let's get to some comedy after all that. Brought to you on today's episode by The Daily Show, hosted by Jon Stewart on Mondays. And he had a great 3 minutes here on the solar eclipse. Take it away, John.
The big news today, the world ended. I think. Are we still on? There was an eclipse. It happened. The sun and the moon did the thing. that everyone's been saying they were going to do for centuries now. The path got totality'd, and now both planets will go back to years of ignoring each other before they inevitably hook up again. Textbook toxic relationship. But not everyone was happy about today's celestial seasonings. For danger lurks.
A Fox News alert, a rare celestial event collides with a policy failure on the ground. The southern border will be directly in the path of totality today when the moon covers the sun for nearly 4 minutes.
We are told that officials are bracing for higher traffic than usual, and that means a real opportunity for smugglers and cartels and migrants to come right in.
Or they could just wait till nighttime. They really... they don't have an eclipse. 4 minutes. I gotta say, though, is there nothing Fox can't tie to immigration? This year's cicada infestation provides perfect cover for Venezuelans. Of course, if you combine the dangers of today's eclipse with Friday's seismic activity in the Northeast, well, a more troubling picture emerges.
Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted that the earthquake and Monday's solar eclipse are a sign from God that Americans need to repent.
How do you know? How would you know that that is what God meant? Why would God be so obtuse? Why would he do that? Or she, why would she? Or how crazy would it be if God insisted on they, them? But honestly, is this shit really how God works? I must let man know to repent their wickedness. How, Lord? Well, I don't know, dim the lights for like 4 minutes. A very specific path. And, God, what else? Give New Jersey a little shake, maybe. Enough to render the buildings to rubble and to bring people to their knees in repentance and atonement? No, just a little like Jersey. Just a little noogie, like, Jersey.
Jon Stewart being very ridiculous and silly, and it's one of my favorite Jon Stewarts, and that was fun and a good way to lead into a very serious conversation that I've got for you coming now. So thank you for the feedback on the news segment. As always, let me know what you want to hear more of, less of, or how to do it better. If you've got any ideas for sound effects, intros, bits, clips, anything you want to contribute or help produce the news segment, I'm always open to it. You can contribute by sending me an email, standupwithpete@gmail.com. And before we get to my guest, I do want to announce a really cool new benefit and feature of membership if you become part of the stand-up community. And I'll be talking more about this each day, plug in it hopefully, and of course in the subscriber email, but it's the Stand Up with Pete Dominick Marketplace. Several listeners have touched on this idea over the years, but Mark Lawler, who is a longtime listener and very generous supporter of the podcast, reached out to me at the end of the year to put the wheels on this baby. But the Stand Up Marketplace is basically a web page where you as a subscriber can advertise and tell people about who you are and what you do, whether you have a business or a service, or you just want to put up a tab about who you are and how to reach you, what you're interested in. The Stand-Up Marketplace will help stand-up listeners connect with each other, support each other, and all of it will be, of course, vetted by me with my stamp of approval. So if you want to post in the Stand-Up Marketplace, you've got to be a subscriber, and the information for the link will be there. Just go to patreon.com/Pete Dominick if you're not already, and I look forward to sharing that with you. Thank you to Mark Lawler for the idea and for the great DJ Monzik, who built the whole thing out, and I'm going to be talking a lot more about him and promoting his work as well, because he is an awesome dude who built the website Stand Up with Pete Dominick, standupwithpete.com rather, and he also built the marketplace, the idea that Mark Lawler and a few of the others of you have talked about. So I hope that you'll check that out. I'm really excited about this new feature, this new benefit for our community. Go check out the Stand Up Marketplace right now. Just follow the link you'll get as a subscriber in the daily email. All right, now it is time to get to Jonathan Metzl, who I told you just a little bit about at the top of the show. Jonathan's commentary has been everywhere, and I want it to be everywhere it hasn't been, but he's been featured on MSNBC, Fox, Christian Ministry Television, Morning Joe, C-SPAN, CNN, HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. He's a weekly guest on the Danielle Moody podcast, a regular co-host of Indisputable on the TYT network, and his opinion essays appear in the New York Times, Washington Post, Politico, and more. Of course, he's also a professor of sociology, medicine, health, and society. He's the director of the Center for Medicine, Health, and Society, professor of psychiatry at Vanderbilt University, the author of the groundbreaking book, Dying of Whiteness, How Politics of Racial Resentment is Killing America's Heartland. And his new book is out now, and that's what we're talking about today. It's called What We've Become, Living and Dying in a Country of Arms. Just going to read a little bit from the summary description of the book. A searing reflection on the broken promise of safety in America when a naked, mentally ill white man with an AR-15 killed 4 young adults of color at a Waffle House. Nashville-based physician and gun policy scholar Dr. Jonathan Metzl once again advocated for common sense gun reform. But as he peeled back evidence surrounding the racially charged mass shooting, a shocking question emerged. Did the public health approach he had championed for years have it all wrong? Long at the forefront of a movement advocating for gun reform as a matter of public health, Metzl has been a constant media call in the aftermath of fatal shootings. But in the 2018 Nashville killings led him on a path toward recognizing the limitations of biomedical frameworks for fully diagnosing or treating the impassioned complexities of American gun politics. As he came to understand it, public health is a harder sell in a nation that fundamentally disagrees about what it means to be safe, healthy, or free. In his new book, What We've Become, Metzl reckons both with the long history of distrust of public health and the larger forces, socials, ideological, historical, racial, and political that allow mass shootings to occur on a nearly daily basis in America, as I just mentioned to you earlier in the news segment. Metzl, looking closely at the cycle in which mass shootings lead to shock, horror, calls for action, and ultimately political gridlock, he explores what happens to the soul of our nation and the meanings of safety and community when we normalize violence as an acceptable trade-off for freedom. Mass shootings and our inability to stop them have become more than horrific crimes. They are an American national autobiography. This brilliant, piercing analysis points to mass shootings as a symptom of our most unresolved national conflicts. What we've become ultimately sets us in the path of alliance forging, racial reckoning, and political power brokering that we must take to put things right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stand Up with Pete Dominick, Dr. Jonathan Metzl. Yeah, there he is. Professor, Dr. Metzl, it's so great to get you back on. Thank you so much for joining me.
I'm so glad to be back. Thank you.
Here's what I want to tell you, first and foremost. Of all your degrees and your awards and your books and your work, I'm being serious with this accolade. It's not one you can measure. Your name and your work gets referenced on shows similar to mine, podcasts, radio shows, TV shows, seminars. Like, a lot of people reference your work. I'm sure you know that, right? Like, you're the guy a lot.
It's plus and minus. I don't know if you saw this when they said the word cracker on the Joe Rogan show a couple of months ago. They flashed a picture of me, and so
you're the official cracker.
I'm the face of Crackerdom. So
I have to look that up right now. I have to know what they were talking about in one context. So you get who attacks you, like obviously the pro-gun crowd, if you will.
It's funny that for this book, because I wrote a gun book. Yeah. It's like when you're doing what I do, it's just like, who's going to attack me today?
Sure. But is it generally right-wing, white gun folk? Yeah. You don't even want to generalize about who criticizes you. And I think it matters a little bit, I suppose. I mean,
it certainly matters. I mean, for this book, because I'm critiquing the left also in this book.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of critiques from the left from this book. Now that I've been critiqued by the left and the right, I can tell you that getting critiqued by the right sells a lot more books. And so when Dying of Whiteness came out, I was giving a book talk at a bookstore, Politics and Prose in D.C.
Oh, yeah, that's the one. That means you're a big deal.
And the thing is, the Nazis came. It was literally 9 Nazis came and stormed the reading. They disrupted the reading. They had bullhorns and stuff. And then
how did you know they were Nazis?
They all had the same haircut. They had the same khaki shorts. They stood in formation. And then I got a text from Richard Spencer a day later, making sure I correctly identified the group. And so they were not hiding it. I'll put it that way. And my dad's a Holocaust survivor. The Dying of Whiteness went to number 2 on Amazon the day after that happened. I called my dad. I'm like, Dad, the Nazis finally gave us something back. And so that was quite an experience. And then I went back to Politics and Press for this book tour. And I'm like, where are the Nazis?
You need the Nazis to listen. Luckily for you, bring them in. Bring them in, guys. I brought a youth Nazi group here to help you sell more books, because that's why you got into this racket that you're in. You got a master's, you got an MD, you got a PhD, so you could get rich selling books because of right-wing reaction. I think that's been the whole.
I'm loaded. It's really.
I think the most interesting thing about you, and I think why people should reference you and your work, is because of that kind of hybrid background and because of the type of research that you do. When it comes to the gun issue, you have bought and sold a public health argument and solution for a long time. You're a public health expert. All of the arguments, you understand the culture around it. You've interviewed all these different gun owners. You, to me, and with this book and with your breadth of work, your career, are the guy. You're the guy to listen to. It doesn't mean you're necessarily right, and I'll ask you to make the arguments because I've heard all of them. I've talked to all of the advocates that run the big organizations and so on. But you are uniquely qualified for this issue and argument. I'm saying that so you don't have to brag, but you pick up where I'm leaving off on why you feel like what you're doing and what you're saying in your career is so important to the discussion around specifically gun violence and gun culture in America.
It's gun violence and it's race and it's politics. I was in medical school and doing my residency and working in emergency rooms in the middle of Detroit or in San Francisco. And it made me realize I'm offering a medical treatment here, but people are coming in with social problems, really. The problems that people are coming in with. I'm wanting to treat people and help them. But I also realize that the things people are suffering from are incredibly upstream issues about racism or inequity or food deserts or gerrymandering. All these things really had real health implications. And so for me, I started as a doctor and my career really has been saying, hey, man, I appreciate that I'm in a position here where I'm helping treat people with the tools I have, but I also recognize the tools I have are not enough. And doctors don't know how to fix those upstream issues. And so we need better alliances. And that's been really the frame of my entire career. And absolutely so with guns. The story of this book, in part, is about being put in a position of being an expert to have a prescription for the gun issue.
Right.
And on one hand, assuming that role because I want to help. On the other hand, the more I assume that role, recognizing that the tools at my disposal just were not anywhere near enough to address the complexity of the problem.
It's so complex, and that's why you really have to buy, well, certainly your last book and this book, because I meant to say primarily, obviously, your understanding on race and what you've written about it and how that obviously is implicated throughout this book. But let's talk a little bit more about, obviously, where you started or where you transitioned. Just real quick, you just mentioned you learned while working in the ER that it was really these social problems, these upstream problems. Did that change the trajectory of your career, or were you always planning on ending up where you did, looking at things these ways?
My brain always worked. Like I'm this kind of person that, like, you're going to tell me there's an answer and I'm going to be like, okay, great. And what else? What's your answer leaving out? That's just how I grew up. And so certainly I was predisposed to that. But I would also say again that I was a humanities social science kid, all of a sudden wearing a white coat in an emergency room, and people look to you, and understandably, like, you don't want to get on a plane and the pilot's like, man, we're having some turbulence. Never seen one of these before. We're all screwed or something. Like, people look to you when you're wearing the white coat to have the answer. And I appreciate that. Just say, hey, look, we've got this taken care of. But also because I did grow up in a particular way. I grew up in a family that knew the stakes of political violence. I grew up in a family I grew up in Missouri, where there were tons of all different kinds of people around, and you could see the history of segregation and anti-Semitism and all these things that I never was going to accept okay, the answer is penicillin. But that just was never going to work for me. And I give the penicillin, don't get me wrong, you want the doctor who knows what to prescribe. But it was also like, okay, but what are the bigger issues that are causing this? So that's just always how I've thought. And I didn't expect to bring that to guns, but boy, with this project, it was so clear the deeper I got into this project that what I was espousing was not going to fix the problem.
Yeah, let's get into it because everybody just has to read this book, including, I think, so many of the people that I interview and talk to on this show and that are showcased in national media who are trying to fight gun violence, who are the most well-intentioned, very well thought out. Sometimes the movement gets caught up in itself and you've got all this momentum on a law or something and you realize maybe that's not the best place to put our efforts. But your book, What We Become, challenges a lot of these assumptions that you yourself held, that a lot of us liberals hold, that gun violence and the prevention of gun violence are best approached by public health experts and policies in towns, cities, states, and as a country. But you've realized, and you provide a whole different kind of point of view, or a slightly different, very different, I don't know how you want to characterize it, that it's not just the public health approach, and some of it actually is counterintuitive and does damage to vulnerable communities that you've written about.
I started, and I'll just say as a kind of kicker that the book tells the story of the Nashville Waffle House mass shooting.
Yeah.
And it tells the story of the shooting itself, but also how, as I researched the shooting, I realized that my first assumptions, I'm put on the spot to say, we need background checks, we need red flag laws, we need assault weapons bans, all the things I say after every mass shooting. Public health is a gun violence emergency. I still really believe those things. I would love it if we lived in a country where we had those things. But 5 years of really unpacking this shooting and what went into it and the before and after of the shooting made me really question the things that I was advocating for, which was, I have to be honest, incredibly difficult process. And if I had to summarize what the argument is in a nutshell,
please do.
It's that, basically there's an assumption if you come up through the world I come up through, which is the medical public health intervening into social issues kind of world, which is, here's this thing we did against cigarettes. Here's this thing we did against drunk drivers or cars without seatbelts or housing with asbestos in it, which is we have a playbook, which is first we do the research to show that something is the product is causing bad health effects, injuries and deaths and sickness and stuff like that. And then the second stage is that we then devise policies and we test those policies to say that our policy interventions can improve and save lives. And then the third part is not only do we try to mandate those policies by working with government, but we also use that as a kind of club to bring industry to its knees, to say there's going to be a class action suit against tobacco, because look, we've got all these evidence that shows that secondhand smoke causes things. And that worked against tobacco, right? People walk into a restaurant now, and if you smell secondhand smoke, you immediately think, man, that's bad for me. Put out your cigarette. If somebody gets in your car and they don't put on their seatbelt, you're like, dude, put on your seatbelt or we're not going anywhere. But it didn't work. It didn't work with guns. And I'm just open about that. Like, why didn't it work with guns? That's the story of the book. And the reasons I come to, first, there are some very practical reasons, which is there are different histories of guns. Guns are regional, they're political, they're racial symbols, they have completely different meanings. And so it was never going to be a place where white researchers or liberal researchers from New York and Los Angeles were going to devise policies that were going to tell red state Americans what to do with their guns. That was never going to work. There's also a financial issue, which is that gun manufacturers are not, they're protected from liability in a different way than cigarettes are. But I think the two biggest ones, number one is we didn't convince red state America that guns were health risks, the way we did with cigarettes and asbestos and stuff. You didn't convince the average red state person that their gun was not, they saw it as protection. They didn't see it like a secondhand smoke or something. So we did not make that argument in a way that was convincing to people. So that's part of it. But the other part is what we were up against wasn't a health argument, because the other side was using guns to seat judges and take control and overturn the Supreme Court. It's so clear from the materials I talk about in the book that a health argument was not the right counter It wasn't the right counter to an adversary that was trying to take control of the country. We needed a power strategy. We needed a judge strategy, and health was never going to get us there. Now, I realize that's a ton coming out of my mouth.
No,
but I will
it's all
say
great.
Those are the main points.
Yeah, and well done and super important, all of it. And again, this is one of those interviews where I'm like, just read the book. You got to read it. You got to read the whole book, because no way to do an interview to get to all the important points that are made here that are debunked, especially from, again, your point of view, being and doing what you've been doing your entire career. But let me just take that to the next logical conclusion. What are the arguments that convince red state America that we can, I don't know, reduce gun violence? How do we, I don't even know exactly what the argument should be made, because it's not going to be, you can't have guns. It's not going to be, we're going to take the guns you do have. And it seems like it's not only even going to be those things that even those red state Americans agree to overwhelmingly in polling, like background checks and red flag laws and so on. So what do you think works? You've interviewed these people. Talk a little bit about what you learned.
For the book, I interviewed hundreds of gun owners and politicians and other people, and gun owners are certainly not one monolithic group. So I will tell you, not to be a super downer, it's a downer, but even the way you ask the question is never going to work. Sure, and that's because the frame we put around it. In other words, your question, which was my question when I started this project, was, can't we get red state gun owners to see that what they're doing is hurting people? That can't we come to common cause? I want all those things to happen. I urgently want there to be gun safety reform. I don't back away from supporting any of the policies I ever did. But even asking the question that way is just not ever going to work. It's always going to be a protest position, because if the goal is talking red state gun owners into seeing the health risks of their guns, that doesn't see the bigger issue which is at play. But the bigger issue at play is that the politics around guns aims to control the judiciary and overturn gun laws in places like New York. We saw this, for example, with the Bruin decision that was from 2022, that the goal is to actually overturn. They're coming for New York. They're coming for Los Angeles. And so talking red state gun owners into finding common cause is not the right response to an agenda. The right response is, how can we get judges in place to keep New York gun laws and Los Angeles gun laws? How can we mobilize to protect the judiciary so that blue states can continue to have gun laws? So for me, that question might sound like really far-fetched, but that was what the Federalist Society thought 50 years ago.
Yeah, they absolutely. That's what they did, and that's why we are in this situation. I think you're diagnosing the legal problem. I mean, I don't think many people would argue 100%. About how we got here, but I interrupted you to the point of the right question.
So in other words, using a health framework doesn't make you see that we're not facing just a health problem. We're facing a catastrophic, urgent legal and judiciary problem. Yeah. And so part of the issue is, if you use the public health frame, which is we want to reduce gun injuries and deaths, which I certainly do, you're going to focus on places where there are the most gun injuries and death. But it didn't give us, we have no theory of power in a way. We have no theory of how are we going to stop what's happening. As we speak, the Supreme Court is likely about to rule that they're going to legalize bump stocks, for example. They overturned 100-year-old New York gun laws. And in every one of these cases, people went into the Supreme Court and said, hey, look, here's all the health data that this is a really can I swear on this show?
Yes, please.
This is a really bad idea. I'll just say bad. But health arguments didn't carry the day because their agenda was not health. Their agenda was power. And so we've tried to refute a power agenda with a health agenda. And it just, honestly, I want all these things. I want mobilization. I want all these things. But the question we should be asking is, right now, how can we protect New York? How can we protect Los Angeles? How can we have judges who are on courts across the country that are going to stand up for common sense safety reforms? It's not about convincing individual gun owners. That is an important part of it. But for me, it's how can we broaden our coalitions so that more people feel like they're under the umbrella of gun safety, so that we can have an agenda that is going to stop what I feel like is coming down the pike right now.
What specifically is your conversation with the anti-gun violence, the gun control organizations. I talk to all of them, but the young people involved in, say, March for Our Lives, or the moms at Moms Demand, or my friends at Brady, or Guns Down. What is your... Excellent. Yeah. Should they fold up their shops and put it all into getting the right judges on the courts?
Absolutely not. No, what they're doing is building coalition. I don't think it's so at odds. And I don't think, oh my God, I'm so smart, I realized this thing. I'll tell you where I find optimism. There are a couple things. First of all, what David Hogg is doing right now, building an organization that uses the rhetoric of guns to intervene into all these other issues. In other words, they're running people for school board, for city treasurer, for election board. In other words, the NRA kind of got its power by running these grassroots organizations that used the kind of Trojan horse of guns to then control all of these levers of local and state power. And I think that David is onto something. Full disclosure, where we talk all the time and stuff like that.
I'm glad to hear it. That's great. No, I think people should listen. You should be in the conversation, in all of the conversations. I'm sure they're very grateful for it. Go ahead.
And so part of what he's doing is he's not just saying, we just need, if we're going to win if we have background checks, because we're not going to win if we just have background checks. What he's saying is guns are part of an agenda where we can actually think about ways to rebalance things by running people at local elections, at mid-level elections, and kind of building things up that actually guns are part of that issue, but it's a much broader agenda that actually has to do with economics and finance and well-being and equity and all these factors that people understand in a much more material ways. Because I just think that the risk, the problem that people like me have gotten into is there's a shooting, we rush in and we say common sense gun reform is advocating for government regulation on firearms without paying attention to all these other issues about structure, economics, all these things that are much more materially. And so then it's too easy for the other side to say, oh, you're just government regulating. And I talk about in the book, election after election, including the very important gubernatorial election that happened in Tennessee right after the mass shooting I wrote about. And there were 6 centrist and Democrat candidates who came in and said, we need more government regulation. And one guy, our Governor Lee now, who said that this is a free country, there should be no limitation, you should be able to have all your power. And that argument, if it's just isolated by itself, it wins every time. And so I'm obviously nervous about the role of guns in the presidential election because Trump is saying the same thing that Lee said. So part of the story is a much broader agenda that pays attention to economics, structure, entrepreneurialism, autonomy, all these other bigger themes that often are too easily refuted. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but let me just try to tell you what I'm hearing, and I want to get right back to the specifics of the book, but I do have to ask you this because it comes from my own experience. Because what it sounds like to me you're saying is that we need to organize and do all the things we need to do across all of the issues within the traditional constructs of organizing and campaigning and electing people so that we can get the right people in the right places so that we can have a broader coalition to create the change and certainly get the judges we need in the right places. And what I struggle with is that you may not know this, you probably don't know this, but I'm boots on the ground in my town, specifically with the school board fight. And your prescription, if I'm hearing it, I would love to think that works, except for when we do all of that traditional organizing, we've been winning, to be clear, and we will probably win, I hope, again, but we're not fighting someone that's in the same game. They're fascists and we're trying to win elections, and they're then they're saying that we said things that we didn't say. They're assaulting us. They're calling child protection services on us to silence us. So it's very hard to organize in the face of fascism. And I'm not being hyperbolic. That's exactly what's happening in my town. I've been very effective, and they've been very effective at trying to silence me. It's been brutal.
I don't doubt that. And let me just say, first of all, thank you. We need 1 million of you doing that.
That's why I do it, for the thanks. I would like you to tussle my hair. Thank you.
Yeah, if you tussle me back. But that was a moment we just had. But,
2 bald men, just in case anybody listening doesn't realize. We're 2 white bald guys. Go ahead, though. But the point, the answer to the question, I appreciate but go ahead.
So I guess there are 3 parts of how I would answer that. Okay. First of all is to, again, just I've been co-director of a gun safety organization in Tennessee for the past 15 years called the Safe Tennessee Project. And so it's exhausting. It's exhausting. And especially when you're up against the kind of things we're up against in Tennessee, the same thing. We're trying to mobilize for all these things. And it's almost surreal. It's definitely not democratic. And people who keep fighting in the face of that, we need more of that.
Yeah, because it's hard to fight people who have guns and about their guns. We are very afraid that they're going to kill you or someone. Worse for me and for you, someone that you care about. I don't know. Let them kill me. I'll be proud that I did what I did, whatever. I want to be purposeful, but God forbid they do something to your family. And it's a horrible, scary thing. And it discourages all of us who want to see change, many of us, from getting involved. That's what you're saying.
And so in a way, like I hope is clear in the book, I'm incredibly supportive and respectful of that work. I'm not trying to say, oh my God, what you guys are doing is wrong in any way, shape, or form. Yep. And I cannot say enough how important the 24 election is. Like, I'm for whatever works for the 24 election right now. So I'm not trying, because if Trump has 4 more years of even appointing judges, if he does nothing else but appoint judges for 4 more years, it'll set us back another 300 years. And
he just said today he's going to appoint Hitler's ghost if elected.
Yeah, no, it feels that way, to a lifetime appointment. Yeah. So the judiciary part, which again is part of what I argue, we haven't paid attention, but what I'm trying to do in the book, I tell the 50-year history of the gun safety movement.
Yes.
Just to explain how we got here. It's not to say, oh my God, you're wrong, or I have some secret formula like the toy in the
No, it's an important history lesson about, as you call it, the gun safety movement.
Yeah. Let me just say these 3 points. The second is like 24, do whatever we can for 24, because it's so vital to mobilize. Our networks are so important right now. They could not be more important. But I guess the third part, again, is I'm in part trying to explain how we got here. In part in the book, I'm just trying to explain how we got here, because I think that understanding is very important. And so after 24, if there is some new gun agenda that comes out of the work I'm doing and other people are doing, it's not just going to be, we want background checks and red flag laws and assault weapons bans. What I advocate for in the end of the book, and then we can go back to earlier, but what I advocate for is an agenda that's much more structural, that looks at a different way of looking at crime, for example, is what I talk about. I talk about what I call gun safety entrepreneurialism, that ties gun safety much more to capitalism in a particular way. I talk about different models of what I call kind of structural approaches to gun safety that really advocate for safety in public spaces. It's not about government regulation. It's about investment in public space and generalizing lessons we've learned in distressed areas, generalizing those to economic betterment other places. So my solution ultimately is one where we're pushed less into a corner of advocating for this one policy is going to do that, and much more into bigger structural solutions that have economic implications. Again, that's a lot of academic words, but I just want to highlight like where I'm going, which is not to say that the incredible people at Brady's and Moms and all that are wrong. But I do think that for me, winning is a bigger.
I understand it so intimately.
Okay.
Yeah, I fully agree. And everything you want to do hinges upon who wins the presidential election, really.
Yeah.
What I'm also hearing. Let me get back to the book and a specific question. I learned so much from reading this and researching it and listening to your other interviews that you've been doing. And I'm so glad that you've been doing so many. And I hope that you continue to. And this book gets all the attention it deserves. Everybody should be sharing what we're learning and links to buying it. But specifically, it's really been interesting to see the way that the gun manufacturers, the gun sellers have strategized and started selling more guns to black folks. And then as a result, using that to sell more guns to white folks. Now, I'm sure, as you mentioned, more Jewish people buying guns. They always win at sales using strategies that are sometimes competing against each other. Tell us what has happened since, say, George Floyd or wherever, how far back you want to go.
I talk about how there's no monolithic gun group, that really what the gun manufacturers are doing is creating a arms race in our country that, in a way, when they got free reign. Now, again, everything I'm saying has a little bit of a critique of my side. And part of the critique of my side is that we focused, understandably, after what's called the Dickey Amendment in the 90s, a research ban, we focused almost entirely on gun injuries and deaths. we didn't focus enough on what it meant to own or carry a gun, which opened up the space for them to create these markets where people could own and carry guns based on really almost no pushback. There was no pushback to these open carry arguments. And so what they've created are these markets where it's almost like clockwork. Some political polarizing thing happens. They then market targeted to the people who are the targets of those issues. Then when those people buy guns, then they go back to the original gun owners and say, hey, those guys have guns. Don't you want more guns? And so George Floyd's a perfect example. After the police murder of George Floyd, which was obviously caught on tape, tremendous marketing to Black and Latino Americans on social media saying the cops aren't going to protect you. They could kill you. You better have a gun to protect yourself. And hey, gun ownership is a Second Amendment right that every American should have. Tons of Black Americans responded understandably to that marketing. Yeah, it's time for us to go buy guns. There were groups like Black Guns Matter that came up. Protesters had guns. Protesters in places like Louisville after Breonna Taylor and other things had weapons. So Black Americans...
Breonna Taylor was shot in her house while she was sleeping by cops.
Yeah, and so in a way, Black Americans became the fastest growing group of gun owners after George Floyd. And then they would take the images of the Black Americans with guns and then go back to the white Americans and say, hey, look, Black people have guns. You better buy more guns or faster guns or better guns.
Amazing.
And so that's what arms dealers do, right? They go to one side of the border and they're like, hey, these guys have guns. And they're like, but by the way, I have a secret gun that those guys don't have. So in a way, we've got that. And that certainly happened after October 7th. Jewish Americans felt unsafe. And so in a way, we're in a point now where the feeling of unsafety, the response isn't, let's build more community structures, community infrastructure. We're in a moment where that answer is, we need to buy more guns. And that logic became the logic that has led us to this point. I think we have 500 million civilian-owned guns in this country by this point, and we only have 40 million people. So we have considerably more guns than people. And so in a way, it's why I think a new strategy is warranted.
Your work has put you on the map and built tremendous credibility amongst Black Americans, specifically Black media, Black scholars. And specifically in this book, what do you talk about when it comes to race and ethnicity and how gun laws, and including even things like background checks, actually make things worse specifically for Black folks? Am I asking that question? Because I think there's
you're absolutely right. Yeah. You're absolutely right.
What are the interests of
Of all the media I've done beside this interview, which is incredible, I had a great conversation with Travis Smiley on Black Talk Radio.
Yeah, I listened to it. That's why I asked.
And to me, that was a really meaningful, powerful interview also. And so in a way, I think that the main points are, again, I urgently am not giving up on gun laws. The places where I feel the best, go to Japan, where everybody's playing by the same rules. You just feel a lot safer walking down the street, or other places like that. I wish we lived in that country, but we don't. And so part of the story is, why don't we live in that country? And part of it is about guns. I agree with that. But think about our main interventions in a way. There's, for example, a background check is when you go to buy a gun, your name is run through a federal database. And if you have a history of incarceration or arrest or something like that, it's going to ping on that background check. And then should this person have a gun? A red flag law, which is something I totally support also, is that if you're exhibiting behavior that's concerning to the people around you, generally you're going to call a police officer or a safety officer who's empowered to come into your house, do a safety check on your relative, who's then going to bring you in front of a judge to see if you're going to temporarily lose your firearms. And who among the people is going to ping more on a federal background check? People who are incarcerated more? Who is going to be more wary of having a cop come into their house to do a welfare check on their relative? It turns out what I found was Black Americans were really not resonating really well with this idea of getting pinged more or having cops come into their house. And so they were then going to what are quote unquote called illegal markets, where you don't have to put up with any of that stuff. You can just go buy a gun or do what's called a straw purchase. And in a way, this idea that, the bad guys are getting the guns through illegal guns. What I found is it was also the policies that we had been promoting over the years, which were primarily aimed at legal gun owners or keeping suburbs safe, but they didn't really make sense. That's why I said before we need broader coalitions. Part of the broader coalition is we didn't for decades. We're doing a better job now, but for decades, we advocated positions that were disproportionate in who was being targeted. Now, we've figured this out more recently, but I would say that part of my critique in the book is talking to black gun owners. They're like, I don't want cops coming into my house. I don't want to have to do this federal thing. So it's not just conservative white guys who are like anti-gun control. It was also the policies that we were focusing on, which for understandable reasons were crafted after mass shootings to say we don't want more mass shootings. But for too long, and that's part of the history I tell, we didn't tell the racial history of how that was going to lead to disproportionate surveillance for communities that were already being surveilled. And that's why when we needed a broader coalition, we found we didn't have one, and many black Americans don't identify with many gun control policies.
And there's a big movement, and it's got a lot of different leaders. I got a lot of black listeners who talk about this issue I've learned from, who are gun owners and who are advocating for others to own guns. I hear from them a lot, and I'm here to listen. And
let me say that I think it's just important for us to take ownership of why that is the case, which is we made assumptions that were based on preventing mass shootings or on white gun owners in the South that had disproportionate effects. So part of the book is I just think it's important to recognize why everybody's just not jumping on that bandwagon. And it has to do with the bad NRA, which is true. But it's also because the policies that I've been advocating for, this was what I recognized. And again, the book is about a black victim mass shooting. And so this was the story that came out of the sources from the
Memphis or the Waffle House in Nashville, Tennessee shooting. Guy, I don't really say their names on the shooter's name, but people can find it. Yeah, go ahead. You say it. And you must think it's okay.
I think I'm a scholar of race. And in the book, I tell the story. The main arc of the book is about a mass shooting that happened in 2018 where a naked white man went into a Waffle House in the black part of town and shot 8 young adults of color. And so I say his name because I tell his history. His name is Travis Reinking. Because even though I understand that people don't want to give notoriety to mass shooters, saying Travis Reinking's name, as I do in the book, and telling his history of how he got to this point and how his guns got to this point, let me tell a story about how his naked white body is a metaphor for a bunch of other bigger racial problems. So I think it's important to tell his story so that I can really tell the full story of what happened in this mass shooting.
I trust you in your judgment, and I would not question it. I don't feel that way about a lot of people, but I definitely feel that way about you. So I'm not going to belabor that one. But just our time is almost up here, and I feel like I knew I was going to feel this way where I didn't do a good enough job getting to all the stuff because there's just so much important in the way that you write it, and the arc of it all is it got to be read in full context. But I guess maybe at the end here, you already talked a little bit about diagnosed the problem and offered some solutions to some extent, but maybe just another thing that you've changed your mind about.
Well, part of the story, there are several stories in the book, and I appreciate this. And let me just say, it's been a hard book to talk about in the media. Like I was on one of the biggest NBC shows around, and they said, "Hey, wait, you're saying gun control is wrong?" And I'm like, "It's not exactly."
Well, you can't. They want to. Exactly. They got your questions and headlines so that they can write that so they can get the clicks. I don't make that kind of money. I don't want to do that.
And so so I appreciate this conversation because it's a hard book to, dying of whiteness is white people are dying of policies that seem to promote their greatness. End of story. This book is how did we get here? Like the initial title for this book is How We Lost, which my publisher made me change because I was saying, let's just figure out how we got to this point in the gun debate so that we can change course. But they're like, nobody's going to buy a book with lost in the title, but it really is a diagnostic book.
The title, of course, What We've Become, not How We've Lost. What We've Become, living and dying in a country of arms. Sorry, go ahead.
And so there are two diagnoses. One, the main arc of the story is telling the story of this mass shooting and how it should have been a sign of the pathology of armed white America, but instead it became a story about how Tennessee mobilized to reinforce the rights of the mass shooter. And so part of the story it really goes into granular detail, remarkable detail. I think I got home videos from the family of the shooter sleeping naked with his AR-15. I got access to his internal monologue about all these kind of things. And so part of the story is the story of the shooting itself. And then the other part of it is thinking in the bigger gun context about what we could have done different. And so in a way, I hope people read it to see where I'm coming from through the story of this shooting. But then the other thing that I changed my mind about was, this is very nitty gritty, but there's, I think, something called the Dickey Amendment. And it was basically, we blocked 40 years of gun research we blocked. And so I'm trying to also reread the effects.
Well, hold on a second. We didn't just to be more clear, sorry, forgive me, scholar, doctor, but we blocked 40 years of research. There's always been this fight that we can research anything that kills people and find out why it's killing people and offer solutions and treatments and medicines and so on, therapies. In this case, the guns are killing a lot of people, but the gun rights, the pro-gun lobby prevented government from doing academic and other medical research on the issue, so we could never properly diagnose it. That was an act. That's what you're talking about with the Dickey Amendment. And when you say they blocked research, that's the fight. Did I characterize that right?
It started fighting in the mid-1990s when there was a rider added to the federal budget, basically, in Congress, that said that no money can be used to research gun safety. And so we had 40 years of no big grants about how we can research gun safety. And the standard narrative that I've assumed for my entire career is we just needed the federal funds to be able to then research gun death the way we research cigarettes and cardiovascular disease and liver and lung disease, all these things, and then we can come up with safety. But what I didn't realize until I researched and wrote this book is that in the 40 years where we couldn't do this, there was a divide that happened where all the gun research that was still being happened was happening largely in liberal places. So in New York, at Harvard, at UCLA, liberals were doing the gun safety research. And they were assuming this idea that therefore, when the funding block gets overturned, we can just go down to red state America and impose these policies. But it almost made it too easy for red state America because basically liberal gun research was coded as a bunch of liberals coming to tell us what to do. And it made it too easy for the NRA to then say, liberals are trying to tell you what to do with this deep thing. We didn't research what would it mean to convince people in red state America to do the things we're prescribing, which we did do in cigarettes, we did do in cars, but we just didn't do it in guns. So we didn't know what it takes to motivate people in red state America. And so it just made it too easy for the NRA to say, this is a bunch of liberals trying to take away your guns, because that's the way it played out. We didn't have enough people in red state gun for structural reasons on our side in a way. And so it just created this red-blue divide that made it too easy for people like Trump to say liberals are coming to take away your guns. And until we try to work against that divide, we're behind the eight ball. Does that make sense?
Yes. How do we work against that divide? You're talking about, but I feel like you're still talking about judges. And I feel like you're also specifically talking about the Supreme Court.
I'm certainly talking about the Supreme Court. But in the end of the book, I do have a 10-part plan for cities and towns and communities to use the rhetoric of gun safety, not through government mandates, to create economic and structural factors. So I do get into this quite a bit in the end of the book.
I should just read that whole page. I should let you go. Not one page, that whole section of the book. I'm literally looking for the page right now. So I'll let you go. And then I guess if there's time again, when I'm done with the book, I would, at this point, you've convinced me so much that your view at least needs to be heard by everybody and debated. If not, it's right. I lean with you're right. And I have always felt that way about your work. But I think every chapter needs to be interrogated and shared. This book needs to be everywhere.
Can I say one more thing about this? I know we're out of time.
No, I'm not the one with. I was just going to go you said sleep with a gun. I nap with a Dyson vacuum. I'm looking at her. I'm looking at her right now. The only thing I have is that nap. So you take as much time as you want and then tell me.
Let me say just two things that might make this a little more concrete, because it feels so abstract. I get that. But part of the issue is we're in a situation now, again, we need to win the next election. So let's do whatever we can.
Yeah.
But I feel like we're in a situation now where we define common sense gun owners as people who are willing to play by our rules.
They're not.
Yeah. And so that defines the few gun owners who are willing to convert to our side. But that doesn't talk to the vast majority of gun owners in places like Tennessee where I am. And so part of what I'm saying is common sense isn't just a gun owner who's willing to accept the rules that I think are important for public health. So I just think we need to, part of what I argue is we need to interrogate safety. I learned this in all my interviews when I would tell people, gosh, here's a shooting. Are you willing to accept background checks? And they're like, why don't you instead ask me what I think needs to be done to make people safe and stuff like that. So I started understanding their point of view a lot more, which wasn't about that. So part of the issue is just there are assumptions embedded in our viewpoint that I'm just trying to interrogate, not to say we need to change, not to critique the people who are doing incredible work. It's just more for me. It just made me think we need to change course in particular ways and win the election.
The most important question I did script and have was you have an MD and you also are a sociologist. You understand mental health. You've written books about it. And the most important question, one of the most important questions you take on in the book is how much of the issue of gun violence is mental health? Because it does seem like an issue where there's, quote, bipartisan support, where people think it's a common sense place to focus. I always argue, even if it is the solution and conservatives agree, they won't pay for it. But you actually argue that it's really like way down the list somehow. And you use data, as always.
No, and again, let me just say, the book is just so people can rethink what they thought they knew.
Sure.
And then think about what are the things we take for granted and how does rethinking what we take for granted, how might that help us begin a conversation about how to dig out from this nationwide problem, but also how to protect places that still have gun laws in place, which is ultimately my goal here. And so part of it is not falling for the bait of the mental illness trap, which is, I hope people, there are 3 chapters about mental illness in the book. I hope people by the end of those 3 chapters, they recognize that mental illness is a non sequitur a lot of times.
Is there any controversy in the mental health expert community about this?
People with mental illness are much more likely to be victims of violence than perpetrators of violence.
Or hurt themselves.
Most gun death has nothing to do with mental illness, has to do with 50 other factors. And there's nothing. So I certainly agree that many mass shooters, including the guy I write about in the book, Travis Reinking, was incredibly psychotic. But ultimately, the reason he was able to commit this mass shooting had much more to do with the fact that he was white, that he lived in a state where it was easy for him to get guns, that he kept getting his guns back. All these other factors were much more linked to the shooting than was his mental illness. And so I'm happy to address mental illness, but we should also address the 150 other things that went into the shooting. And so for me, it's like when we isolate it, it ends up leading us down the wrong path.
And the wrong path is often followed in this issue because of the just crazy spectacle of mass shootings and the way that they get covered. But if you look at statistics, cold and hard, of who dies of gun violence, a huge percentage, and what is it, is suicide. So if what you're saying is true, do we not talk about suicide as being a mental health issue? And if most people that are dying of gun violence are killing themselves, how come that's not a big part of the discussion, mental health? Was that an ignorant and stupid question?
No, not at all. Most gun suicide is not linked to a lifelong history of depression. It's not like Sylvia Plath, who went to a psychiatrist 5,000 times.
The bell jar made me mentally ill, that book. Oh, I hated that.
Like, most gun suicide is an access issue. The standard gun suicide story is got drunk, got fired, found out your wife is having an affair with the neighbor.
Circumstantial.
So it's 59 minutes or less at overwhelming impulse. And there's a gun suicide is not really a depression issue as much as it is an access issue, which is why a structural intervention like a gun safe, for example, is going to be more effective than years of therapy for gun suicide. And so it's a perfect example of how something that seems like it's all about mental illness very often is much better treated with a structural intervention. That's just one of many examples.
Yeah, that just makes me beg one more question. I don't know if you have the data at your fingertips. What percentage of gun suicide is men? Because when you describe that scenario, it sounded like men.
No, it's 80% men, over 80% men. But again, it's linked to having a gun. The more people who have guns around, in moments of crisis, the more those numbers will even out. And so when more everybody used to think like, oh, Black Americans are safe from gun suicide. They supported gun control for a long time. Women were not gun owners the way men were. The more gun ownership becomes an everybody thing, I guarantee you the more this will even out. If you're having an overwhelming crisis and there's a gun available in an hour or less. And so it's incredibly structural, but it's important to note, and it's good to talk about this because 2/3 of gun death is gun suicide.
I think I had suicidal ideation where you want to die or something it's called. When I lost my job, it was really horrible. And in corporate media, the greatest job, everything's going great. And I didn't have a lot of resilience in my life. And I think a lot about how I wanted to die at different periods. I didn't want to kill myself, but I did say one time out loud, like in an interview, if I had a bottle of whiskey and a gun on certain days or nights, it would have not been, I don't think I would have done it, but I know that people do. And there's data that says, and I think you could probably cite it simply, that if you give people a day, a lot changes, and you're sober and there's no whiskey and you didn't have access. You weren't able to buy that gun. But the fact that you can just go get the gun right now at a sporting goods store in this moment of your depression and you're drunk or whatever, boom.
Yeah. So perfect example.
Yeah. All right. I'll let you go. I loved it. I have so much admiration for your work. When I finish the book, I will harass you to join me again. And I can't imagine promoting anything more than this in your work. I'm really excited to do that. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for putting it all on the line. I know it can't be easy and it's really hard, but I'm so glad there are Americans like you doing what you do. And I just am so grateful for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, there he goes, Jonathan Metzl. Go get the book, all the information for it in the show notes. I could have been more prepared for that interview. I will be the next time I talk to him, but I hope you appreciated it. And you bumblebees here at the end, I hope you'll all check out the stand-up marketplace, everybody, and you will get all the information and directions emailed to you in today's show posting for the Patreon subscribers, patreon.com/Pete Dominick. If you want to be a part of our community and make some money, maybe meet new people, check out the stand-up marketplace. Okay, that's it. John Carroll will be there, I'm sure. And hopefully you will as well. Go follow the directions to learn how to post there. There's a great YouTube video that DJ made, and you'll get the link to it if you're a subscriber. John Carroll he's the best. He is the singer and songwriter who wrote our song, performed it in Vegas for us just a couple of weeks ago now, and he takes us in and out each and every day. That intro music is his as well. Go buy his song, this song, and more at johncarroll.org. Talk to you tomorrow, folks.
Your fence, even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense and you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town, just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down, boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up and show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and hear